Hi, I'm Roy Collin, the host of the podcast. You can find everything about me by scanning the QR code there or going to roycollin.com. And you'll find my six podcasts, the Podfather, helping people become podcasters, the Awakening, Exposing Fraud and Corruption, but with solutions, the Crypto, all things blockchain technology, meditation podcast, speaking podcast, and the Learn Polish podcast. You can also help the show by actually making a donation, visiting the store, or helping my sponsors. I hope you enjoyed this week's show. Welcome to the Speaking Podcast. You can find all our episodes on speakingpodcast.com. I guess today, entrepreneur, author, student of life, and sober from decades. Currently, North Georgia in the US. Please welcome Daryl Dittmer.
Thank you so much for having me, Roy. I appreciate it.
No problem. And I suppose just prior to going on, I was admiring the painting behind you. So for those watching on Spotify, BitChute, YouTube, or Rumble, they'll be able to see that. But it's a beautiful painting that you've got there.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I've aspired to be more like a bison in my life, and so that just seemed to fit. And I'm not sure if it worked or not as far as my life, but I do love the painting as well. Beautiful colors.
Brilliant. So I know we're going to touch on your book, but I want to kind of peel back the layers a bit, go into the earlier, because I was reading the book and like the different farmhand and just with your dad and everything. But for those that don't know you, you might let them know a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. I grew up in a Midwestern U.S. family, which, back in that time when I was a kid, it was the 70s, and everybody's dad was, either worked at GM, Ford, or Chrysler. My dad was a mechanic, and he supported us, took care of us, and my mom, spent time. She took taking care of us kids and taking care of the house and that sort of thing. So I guess it was fairly traditional in terms of that time frame. My dad was a pretty tough guy. He was a Navy veteran in the Korean War, and he taught us to be, at that time, I guess what you would consider, grow up like a man, do your own work, support yourself, and from a young age, just having to do things for ourselves, whether it was fixing things or, making our own money. My brother and I were out there shoveling driveways when we were 8, 9 years old, and we'd come home with, $5 or $10 in our pocket and feel like we just won the lottery. So I think it was a little different time, and something that shaped me immensely, growing up with a dad and a mom, and a household like we grew up in. And it wasn't atypical for the time. It was very typical for the time. So no complaints. It was a great upbringing.
Very good. And I mean, you're honestly like serial entrepreneur, because like what I read, just different working on the farm, doing different things like that. So you might just kind of tell about your kind of entrepreneurial at a younger age, because I think, like the smoking was the first kind of step to the, addictions.
Sure. I guess, it was instilled in us when we were kids. And my dad, he worked at General Motors for 41 years. So he was probably the exact opposite of being an entrepreneur, but they always, instilled in us to the extent they could that, we could do whatever we want with our lives. And so, from my brother and I getting out there shoveling driveways when we were young to working on farms and, learning how to build things, learning how to fix things. I got involved in carpentry in my late teens, and then I ended up going to college after I dealt with, going to treatment for some addiction issues. But I opened up a loft building business for people in college. Some of the younger people would come in, and to raise their beds off the floor in their dorm room, we'd build lofts. So I'd build beds out of 2x4s and 2x6s, and it was funny because the local lumber yard that that actually built lofts before I came along, said that they shut down their loft building business because I built so many lofts at the school, which was great, other than the fact that probably for the first 3 or 4 weeks of school, I didn't go to too many classes because I needed to make money. Um, so, that happened. And then I tried a whole bunch of different things in terms of, you know, making a living. And after college, I actually went back to carpentry. I graduated with a criminal justice degree, but I did not pursue that. Um, and the reason I got that degree was because my brother was a police officer, my grandfather was a police officer, and my other grandfather was a firefighter. So that was kind of all I knew. But I tried a couple of sales things, which was not my necessarily, it didn't feel like my cup of tea. A couple of people asked me to get involved in sales, and first couple I said no, and then I finally said yes. And I got involved in sales, and which, long story short, moved me out to Boston from Michigan, and landed a job doing commercial insurance sales. But the entrepreneurial part of that is I started off at a certain salary amount, but the salary amount um, also had to be paid back. So I started at $30,000 a year, but if I didn't make the sales that would help pay that money back, then I owed the money back to the company. So that was quite an interesting entrepreneurial adventure. And not long after that, another company came in and bought the first company that I got involved with, and I started, and I was able to acquire some ownership in the new company, which was great. Then I had a stake in that company, which was wonderful. I hadn't known that that was even possible, in my younger years, but I did that for a long time. And then I got into, not wanting to do that anymore because we became more like a corporate entity as opposed to, a startup company, which cultural differences, all kinds of different changes happened, which, human resource departments, all that sort of stuff that just makes it a little more cumbersome to be involved. And, it was difficult for me, just coming from where I came from. I didn't want to be involved in the corporate environment. So my wife and we bought a restaurant. I got involved in doing some building in terms of, rehabbing old homes, that sort of thing. And so it's been an interesting journey from an entrepreneurial perspective, but and as difficult as it can be sometimes, I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Very good. And I'm just curious, what's the mindset like with the job you mentioned that was 30K, but if you didn't make the sales, you had to pay them back. Were you kind of comfortable, or did it actually put you under more pressure when you had that kind of contract?
Huge amount of pressure. It was a huge amount of pressure. Because it's different than, here's your paycheck, and, whether you do a good job or not, here's your paycheck. This was here's your paycheck, but if you don't do a good job, you owe it back. And yeah, an incredible amount of pressure. But it wasn't the worst thing in the world for me because I've historically been a fairly driven guy, so it worked out just fine. And I think the pressure contributed to it working out just fine.
No. So if we kind of go down, I mean, the book is kind of more your journey and overcoming addiction and stuff like that. But like from what I could read, it was when you were on the farm, smoking was the first kind of thing that you got addicted to. Yeah.
Correct. Yes, that was my introduction to addiction.
So, like, because you've been clean and sober for a long time, but you've went through a kind of a fairly spiral. So you might kind of take us on down that road, and then how you kind of bounced your way back out of it.
Sure. It was really a progression. And they talk about that in addiction and addiction circles, and how things just progress over time. And the interesting part is some people may start drinking when they're younger, and or experiment with drugs, that sort of thing, and kind of fall away from it over time. And I didn't do that. I kept progressing and progressing in terms of the drugs that I was using, but also, progressing in that need for having something, to make me feel differently than what I felt. I was a pretty emotional and fairly insecure kid, and this was a way to feel better. So it went from, drinking and then smoking weed and then hallucinogens and, and speed and got into cocaine, and then I got into dealing cocaine. So my life became about the next drink or the next drug or the next high or whatever it is, and that was what I went after. I didn't pursue anything else other than, I had to take care of myself and maintain jobs and that sort of thing. But it really that was my pursuit in life. And then I was fortunate that, and this was when I was 18 years old, and my parents basically, for, to keep a long story relatively short, they said, go talk to this drug counselor, or just get out of here. And so I ended up, after just being scared to death, the hardest thing for me was being found out and exposed and feeling like I'm letting everybody down, which I was. But there's always that little hint of, okay, I'm hiding this to a certain extent, but I wasn't hiding it. It was right out there, and everybody knew that I needed help. So I ended up making the decision to go talk to this drug counselor, and he intimidated me. So, I went in there, and he basically said, look, you can't lie to me. I'm going to know every time you do, just don't even try. And that scared me. I was 18, like I said. So, I was just a kid, and I had this guy sort of jumping down my throat. Um, and I told him, at to the best of my ability at that point in my life, I told him the truth. I told him, just as much as I could, telling him the truth. And I ended up going into treatment, and it was just after my 19th birthday, a few days after my 19th birthday, I went into treatment. That was January 3rd of 1985. So, and getting sober was, and getting straight and off drugs, there's a couple of different aspects to it. The first one is getting rid of the drugs and the drinking and all that stuff, so the mind and the heart and the soul can clear up enough to actually start to do something with life. And that's what happened for me. I made it a point at that time to do something about myself and do something about my life, because I was miserable. I was, 18, 19 years old, and just a miserable human being. And actually, to the point where I contemplated not wanting to be around on this planet anymore. So, going from that to having to be teachable, having to be, um, just put myself in a position where I can better myself and better my life. Um, that was the turning point for me, and that's what I decided to do, and that's what I've been doing ever since.
Excellent. And just with, like, when you were going through all this before you decided to get help, how was it for, because you have a brother and a sister, and your parents, obviously, they gave you an ultimatum. But I mean, it must have been very hard for, especially the mother, seeing her child kind of go down this. So how was it like in the household as you were kind of going down this slippery road?
It was not good. It was a always tenuous. I did my best to avoid my parents, because I was doing something most of the time, whether it was, drugs or drinking or whatever. That's just was my sort of state, to the extent that I could have that happen on a daily basis. And so the family situation was not good. My dad he worked a lot. And so he wasn't around for it all, although he knew it was happening. And he had some of his own past stuff, I think. So he wasn't as concerned as my mom, but it tore my mom to shreds. And actually my brother and my sister, both had their little bouts with with their experimentations and sometimes even more than that. So it was an interestingly dysfunctional household, I guess you could say, for those years.
Very good. With the book, right? It's When I Stopped Fighting, and I believe it was somebody that was actually in the group that gave you that kind of something he was saying to you, why you came up with the title for that.
It was my mentor, which when I decided to go to college, I wasn't really slated to go to college as a youth. We came from a very blue collar family and environment, and nobody had graduated from college, and so it was a little bit of an anomaly for me to go, but I decided to go after I got sober, and so that was about 8 months into sobriety, and I met a gentleman named Bud. Now, I was 19 at that point, and he was probably in his mid 50s, and he had been sober for about 15 years at that point, and he was the most important person to come into my life at probably the most important time. And because going to college as a sober 19-year-old, who does that? Who stays sober in college, right? It's just not something that happens. So Bud said to me, as I was wrestling with some problem or issue or whatever, and I grew up fighting. I grew up fighting life. I grew up fighting, just everything in terms of having a normal existence. I just wasn't about that, and I growing up with the shake it off, rub some dirt on it, no pain, no gain, all that sort of mentality. And as I was going through some of these issues, Bud said to me, Daryl, when you stop fighting, the fighting stops. And it resonated with me at that time to the extent that it could. And as we get older, things seem to resonate in a different manner or more so. And I've been carrying that saying with me my entire life to stop myself from fighting, to stop myself from just being argumentative with myself and my life. And those were probably the most important words ever said to me at the most important time.
Excellent. Yeah. No, good advice. With your brother and your sister, then they had their journeys after yours? That
Yeah,
And how did you? Because you had the experience then of kind of realizing I'm just after coming out of this hole, and then you see your loved ones kind of, your brother and sister doing the same. Were you, with the experience that you had, able to offer advice, or does people just need to do their own journey?
my brother, and that's a great question. I love that question because that can be such a difficult thing, for people who are sober and they see other people doing it, and when it's early on in sobriety, you think, oh, I got this, I can help, sort of cure everybody else, but that's not the case. My brother was he struggled, but he sort of came out of it, and he's just a normal human, which is great. And my sister struggled a little more, I would say. And that was a difficult time for me trying to help her. But I got great lessons in the fact that I can't do it for anyone or change anyone or morph anyone's trajectory unless they're willing to do it for themselves. So that became something that my sister had to work on herself.
And because I grew up in a kind of rough neighborhood, and I saw there was a lot of alcoholism. And what I've seen with the kids, it's either they didn't touch it, or a lot of them became alcoholics. And I'm just wondering, the fact that the three kids, was there drinking going on in the house? What happened that made? And not saying this on a judgmental side. I'm doing this on for those listening, because this is international. Everybody's got this on next doors, the whole thing. Do we able to pinpoint? Because usually at the time we can't, but when we kind of look back, on life, we go, I think this was the reason. Was it the area, or was it something in the household?
I think ultimately I think it was something in the household, but I think my dad hardly ever drank. My mom hardly ever drank. When they talked about, any sort of alcoholism in the family or anything like that, and I don't believe it's a hereditary thing. I think it's more of a nurture thing than it is a nature thing. In terms of people, morphing into that sort of a lifestyle. But I, I believe it was from an expectation standpoint, and I don't know if this counts, but it's all I got. We had very high expectations of us as humans, and seemed like there was a lot of pressure, and there was a lot of we just needed to perform with grades and with manners and with discipline and all these sorts of things. And I think that there was a part of it where, for me, I just rebelled. And I think my sister did the same thing. And I think my brother did the same thing too. But it wasn't, we didn't sit around watching my dad drink or my mom drink or anything like that. My dad would have a couple beers a year, but I think it was maybe an environment where we couldn't meet the expectations that were presented to us, and so we tried to run away from that.
What I've seen, because I worked in construction in Ireland for years, and there's a lot of drinking goes on involved with people, tradespeople and everything. So there was times we'd go to, like Christmas party and stuff like that, and some of the people that were off it, they could come in for an hour, just kind of shake the hands, and then they just kind of, how after you overcome it, because unfortunately you go to christenings, you go to barbecues, it's hard to kind of stay away from it. How do you navigate that? Because I know there's a lot of people that are actually fighting that battle as well.
It can be a tough one. It can be a real tough one. I think I was fortunate when I first got sober that, there's a period of time where you just feel resolve and you feel strong and you feel, for me, I felt, okay, I'm going to do this. And I was fortunate enough when I got into college to have there was one other guy on campus that was sober, and call it divine providence or whatever you want to call it, but he just happened to be put into my dorm, the same dorm as me. So we were able to kind of team up and help each other stay sober. And then we gained other friends that were very active in just, nobody giving us temptations, nobody talking to us about drinking, nobody, presenting us with drinking or drugs or whatever. We had a little team of friends that were helpful in that way. So, but I think the most important thing for me was to begin to learn to understand myself. Because there's a part even in the 12 steps where it talks about, you can't just keep somebody away from the drinking or the drugs. They have to come up with the intestinal fortitude to be able to overcome the temptation, which, for me was bettering myself and getting myself into a position where I enjoy my life, and I had to figure that out so that I didn't have to go back to something that needed to make me feel better or different than what I felt.
And like you're married, and I don't know, does your wife drink, or like in like normal social drinking or stuff like that? Because I'm kind of curious, because obviously in the AA meetings and stuff like that, you come across situations like that. Are you better off when a partner doesn't, even if they're just having a glass of wine with their stuff, that it's just there's no alcohol in the house? Because I know the temptation is there, and if you know what it's like, so how do you navigate that one when the partner, whether male or female?
really is. I think it would be extremely difficult if a partner was an active, avid user of drinking or drugs or whatever it happened to be. I think that would be really difficult. And my opinion of that would be, um, eh, you have to check and make sure that works for a person, or if it doesn't work, maybe a different path needs to be taken. Because my opinion is there's nothing more important. Life starts for me when I'm sober. Life ends if I'm not. So that's got to be the most important thing. And I think that's crucial for, especially for newly sober or fairly newly sober people, to understand that if you don't have sobriety, you don't have anything. And when it comes to partners, I was fortunate that I was 20 years sober before I got married. And not to say that I didn't have situations before that where, I'd be dating someone or whatever, and they were a little more active in the drinking and or drugging life than worked for me. So I think it's important to stay away from it, and to the extent we can, until there's enough inside of us from a strength perspective and from a self-esteem perspective and from a feeling good about ourselves and our lives perspective to be able to overcome those temptations. But the interesting thing also is when we're able to overcome those temptations and we feel very good about ourselves, we're probably not going to choose a partner who overdrinks or overdrugs or, anything like that. My wife drinks, but it's very rarely and it's very social, and it has no effect on me whatsoever.
Excellent. And I believe you're a father as well, that your kids have left the nest. Yeah, I think there was a few shows of it. So I just curious about kind of, because I know that most of us went, when you're getting to a certain age, you try everything. But given your own journey, what was your advice to them? Like, did they know your full journey, and were you kind of saying, don't even try it?
Absolutely. It wasn't a donate ever even try it thing for me. It was a, here's my stories. Here's what's going on. Here's what my life has entailed. Here's where I was when I was your age, whatever that age was at any given time, 16, 17, 18, whatever it was. And here's some of the things, some of the trouble that you can step into, that you don't expect when you think about, a little bit of casual drinking with friends or experimenting with, weed or pot or whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of things that can happen that we don't expect to happen if we have that propensity for addiction. And so those are the things I what I don't want to see happen, especially with younger people, is they stay completely away from everything when they're young, and then when they're 40 or 50, they start to you know do the things that they felt like they missed when they were young, and I've seen that happen too. So it's a healthy respect for what can happen. And honestly, if my stories don't keep people from wanting to go down that road, then I'm not sure what would.
With the AA, because I had heard that sometimes you were going to like maybe one or two meetings in a day, but now you don't need to no more. And I believe you. Like if you said was it, so that means you'll be 40 years sober next year, like in January. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Oh, no, congratulations. No, that's incredible. So, like, for those that don't know about the AA meetings and what exactly it entails, how it helps, because I know that there's clinics and stuff like that, but what I don't like is sometimes these clinics, some can work very well, but they're very expensive. And a lot of the times, addictions, depending on the home circumstances and everything, they don't have a penny to their name. But I believe with the meetings, you just turn up. You don't have to be paying. I don't even know if there is a cost or donations or something. I don't. You might just tell people that about that, because I know that's international. AA meetings are all around the world as well.
For sure. And, from a cost perspective, AA doesn't cost anything. If you have $1 to donate or a couple bucks or whatever, certainly do that. It's a self-supporting organization, which I think is wonderful because that means it's not really beholden to anyone other than, its members and being sober. But it really is for me, and I think it's different for everybody, but the 12 steps really are a foundation for the rest of our lives. The first step is really the only one that deals with in AA's case, it deals with alcohol, but it can be applied to anything. It can be applied to drugs. It can be applied to gambling. It can be applied to anything that we could be addicted to. Um, and then the rest of it from, after step one is about, okay, I need to take some of the garbage out that I accumulated throughout my time or my life, in doing some of the things that I was doing. And I need to improve myself. So, can I admit my mistakes? Can I ask for forgiveness from the people that I hurt? Can I talk to them about some of the things that I did and apologize and or make amends for those things? Can I put myself in a position where I can leave my past behind me and move forward with a new way of life and a new way of thinking and a new way of looking at, you know, uh, a God or a higher power or, some sort of something that's bigger than me. I'll tell a quick little story. I grew up with a Lutheran education, so I was Protestant, and that didn't seem to do a lot of good for me as I got involved in addiction and all that sort of thing. So when they mentioned a higher power or God or whatever in AA, I was just kind of like, that didn't seem to work out that well, and that wasn't that great of an experience for me. But what they emphasize, what it is it's of my understanding. It doesn't have to be anybody else's higher power or God. So, and I think that's really crucial. And for me, for a while, it was just being around AA. It was being around those tables and talking to people and sharing and them helping me and hopefully me, helping them to the extent that I could. So I guess to put a ribbon on this, it really is. It's a program where we improve and we get ourselves into a position where we don't need to drink and we don't need to drug and we feel better about our lives and we continue to maintain that and improve upon that as time goes on. I try to improve upon myself as much as I possibly can, and it's one of the reasons I wrote my book because I want to give it back. I want to give back what I've been given, which is crucial for me. And I think it's crucial for people who are in sobriety. If we can't just take it all for ourselves, we have to be able to give it away and give it back to people who need it. And so that's the 12 steps in a nutshell, I guess. There's one little way that people describe it. It's trust God, clean house, and help others. That's kind of what you need to do with the 12 steps, and that's really all it is.
Thanks. I know this might be a strange one now, but just from my experience in like different groups that I've been, so business networking group BNI in Ireland, Berlin, in Poland, not so good. Toastmasters groups that I've been in, I could see the different personalities and the people that were kind of putting it together made some groups a bit negative and others way more positive and everything. And the reason I'm asking is, if somebody goes to a meeting, is it possible that they should try a few because maybe the wrong people are leading it?
Without a doubt, without a doubt. There's a saying that I heard. I don't know if it's any of the literature, but but principles before personalities, right? And that's, I think, is incredibly important, especially with something like the 12 steps, because we're pretty volatile human beings when we get into the 12 steps, and we just start to become sober. And, for me, I was humbled by my experiences, but I'm also, I'm not sometimes, or hadn't been, the easiest guy in the world to get along with. And I think that volatility just comes with that part of our lives at that time. So I would 100% say, go around and check out as many different meetings as a person possibly can, because what may not fit in one place or at one meeting could easily fit in another meeting or another place.
And is it the same? And I'm only talking from kind of when I saw when you go to a Toastmasters, you'd have like a mentor. And sometimes I was lucky, I got a very good person and I became a mentor of a lot of people. But I also know that sometimes you have people, and I know with G, it's like the sponsor, and it's the same kind of thing. Do you get is the sponsor just kind of put on you, and do you get a few, or is it just one? Because sometimes it can be a personality clash, and I'm just wondering when that's not. I mean, you obviously got a very good one. Just the fact that he inspired you to create the title and everything, and it's helped you. But I'm just curious on the sponsors.
Sponsors are something that you seek out yourself, and that's one of the things that they say is absolutely crucial to sobriety. And again, I had been humbled enough, I guess, to understand that, or at least for the most part, understand that I didn't know anything, and this whole life thing was new to me anyway because I was 19. But now I got to get sober, and do the life thing. So I was a little more open, but I was looking for someone who seemed happy and seemed content and seemed calm and wanted to help other people. And Bud, for me at that time, was that person. But and I think it's an absolutely crucial thing in sobriety, just like Toastmasters, right? You find somebody who's been doing it longer, you find somebody who's better at it, and you find somebody who you would like to emulate. And Bud was a person I wanted to emulate from the perspective of how he seemed to approach life, which, thank God, it was what I thought was true was actually true.
Yeah. And just finally with the book. So you might, because like I like your writing style. It's kind of taking you on the journey as you're going through it. You might let people know what you're covering in the book, because I know that it's your mission to actually help people to what you've actually succeeded.
Sure, it's my story, it's my journey, and it's told through the stories in my life. So it's not a, you need to do this kind of book. It's not a, here, if you don't do this, you're going to be in trouble kind of book. It's a book that goes through my journey. And I'm a firm believer that if somebody can use something in my book based on my stories, that's what I want them to be able to do. So it goes through, the addiction, the dysfunction, and me starting from a young age to getting sober, to recovery, to taking a lot of risks in my new life, to feeling that freedom, and going from, humble and fairly tumultuous beginnings to a life that, quite honestly, at this point, I would not have been able to dream of being so fortunate to have. Um, and then I think one of the most important things is it's about my failures, but it's also about, being able to sprinkle in some successes, because what's the point, right, if we don't have some successes? And the losing and the winning, and the last third of the book really is about the lessons that I learned. Not that everybody has to do the same things and that sort of thing, but here's what worked for me, and I'm hoping that it will help work for you.
Brilliant, brilliant. Listen, I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. And I just like a lot of the stuff that we've touched on. I know that a lot of people could resonate with that. So, I think they should definitely check out your book, and you might let them know where they can find you.
Thank you. So I have a website. It's www.daryldittmer, DARYLDITTMER.com. And if anybody's looking for further information or help, you can reach me via email. Just shoot me an email, and that's Daryl, DARYL, at daryldittmer.com. My book is available on Amazon, When I Stop Fighting, The Unexpected Joy of Getting My Head Out of My Ass. So either of those ways, you'll be able to find the book, and you'll be able to find me.
Make sure I put the links, both the audio and the video. And with the email, I'll put a bracket because otherwise you get a load of spam when you actually put the full email, but it'll be both on the audio and video. Thank you very much, Darryl.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
No problem. So that's all for the Speaking Podcast. Until next week, take care. So I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. As mentioned at the start, you can find my 6 podcasts on roycollin.com or scan the QR code if you're looking to start a podcast or do a podcasting tour. I help with that. Also, if you're looking for a virtual assistant, we also have that service. And you can help the show by visiting the store, supporting our sponsors, or making a donation. Until next week, take care.